Thank you for your comment. I'm glad that you appreciated me underlining the fact that I've noted like this huge discrepancy between the evolution of fashion versus scent. And I come from a background of classical music where I studied in classical piano, and I also worked for just about 20 years for symphony orchestras. So, music originally was my thing, and I was very much interested in cross-comparing different art forms in a certain period. And what we notice is often that the evolution of different art forms are somewhat asymmetrical. They don't always necessarily follow each other. And I'll give you an example. So let's talk about the Baroque, which is a period that I know rather well. I worked for a Baroque orchestra for around like 8 years, and it was also a type of music that I was very fond of. I still am. There are many interesting things that happened during the Baroque in different art forms. So if we're talking about music, and obviously I'm coming from the point of view, a very Eurocentric point of view. When I talk about the Baroque, I'm talking about what was happening in Europe with Bach, Handel, France, etc. So I just wanted to be clear on that contextual frame. But what was happening during that period is that the music was following very strict rules of harmony. So composers were somewhat forced to follow pretty set rules of construction. There were some liberties that they could take, but overall there were general rules of harmony that composers needed to follow. And back in those days, music wasn't necessarily meant to express, huge, heart-wrenching, emotional states. And not to say that the music of the time wasn't expressive and that the techniques weren't expressive, but it wasn't meant necessarily to represent very dramatic emotional states. You have to keep in mind that at that period, people were rather reserved when it came to their emotions, and you kind of see this in like operas like Dido, where she's like the main character is kind of reluctant to actually say how she feels, because back in those days, if you said how you felt, even if you didn't participate in the behavior, just to say it and to exteriorize it was bringing it to reality. So like it's like as if you'd done the sin, right? So the music kind of transpires that internal turmoil without going into excesses. Now, interestingly, if we compare it to the art of the period, this is from Caravaggio, arguably very contrasting and dramatic, right? They were using like a technique of chiaroscuro, which had like incredibly dramatic effect. I mean, look how graphic and dramatic this other painting by Caravaggio is. Now, let's look at fashion. Look at how extravagant this is. We had a lot of fabric. Look at the sleeves of this fellow. A lot of detail and embroidery. And the fashion was a bit over the top. We can't see it here, but there was a lot of big hair happening as well with all these wigs. And, kind of reminds me of the excesses of the 80s. And that kind of spilled over into the world of perfumery at the time, where you had like vessels that looked like this, super, super ornate. It was amazing because people kept these a lifetime and refilled them. But these were like very extravagant pieces. And in terms of scent, it was an exciting time. There was a lot of experimentation. People were still discovering material. Different trade routes were introducing different scents. But really the art form was, if we're talking about modern perfumery where they were started to mix alcohol with materials, that really came a little bit after. Keep in mind that they were still developing methods of extractions for different materials. But all in all, it was a very exciting time. And obviously materials at the time were all from natural sources, so we're not even close yet to the introduction of synthetics. So circling back to today, what I've noticed when I'm cross-comparing the world of perfumery, which is something, it's pretty recent for me, like it's been 4 years that I've started my perfume journey. What I've noticed is that the evolution of other arts, let's say visual, fashion, etc., has been going faster and faster, yet when we look at the world of perfumery, it doesn't seem to be progressing at, the same speed. And I think this might be because of the way that we are wired in terms of our senses. And, this is like a cliche in the world of perfumery, but scent is emotion. And the reason why we say that is because when you smell something, physically what happens is that it goes to your center of emotions first and then analyzed. But when it comes to our other senses, like our sense of hearing, touch, and seeing, It gets analyzed first, then gets interpreted in different ways emotionally. So emotions come afterwards. So because of how we're wired, there might be this emotional bias that is preventing us to, in my opinion, step into a more contemporary period of us appreciating scent. This would explain in part why I feel we're like still at the period of appreciating just pretty scents, and for us appreciating in the world of perfumery, and this is just by comparing with other art forms and where they are, what I would describe as pretty basic concepts. So, like recreating the scent of a certain flower or the scent of a certain time and place, like a pretty impressionistic approach to the medium. And not to say that there aren't any artists that are kind of pushing those boundaries, but as a general rule, if we're looking at the general commerciality of what's available in perfumery, it's dominated by these basic concepts. And like Rome wasn't built in a day, and there's nothing wrong with those concepts per se. But I think it is kind of interesting to kind of cross-reference other arts to, kind of take a slice of humble pie and see where we are and realize where we are. So in terms of what I'm excited to see in perfumery is I'm excited to see more abstract concepts becoming more mainstream. But I think for this to happen, I think bigger brands will have to be ready to take a little bit more risks. Otherwise, we're kind of turning in circles, and all we're really doing is moving from one exciting material to the next. Like today is pistachio, tomorrow is going to be what? Like almonds? Ooh, exciting. Or like recreating the scent of a library or a cafe. Yeah, I'm kind of over it. Yeah, I'm good. I'm ready for the next step.